Thanks for meeting with me, Ohad. I want to write a blog post, have an idea for a blog post that is the missing pieces of the Jamstack, or maybe the missing piece. And so the background for me is that I was a big Jamstack fanboy, really, when I first heard about it, which I felt like were in the early years, I think mid to late 2017 or so, working for an agency. And we went all in. We were like, it's great for developer experience, great for end users, and it's gonna cut our development costs in half. It's gonna be great. So I've been really excited about it from the beginning. But I know that we ran into some challenges at the agency during that period of time, for the first year or two after using it. So that's kind of what I want to explore today, and in this post I want to write. And so as I've had various Jamstack focused conversations at Stackbit over my first couple months, a couple people have said, well, Ohad has been around since the beginning. And I'm like, oh yeah, well, me too. But they're like, no, really the beginning. And so I wanted to hear it from you. Like, you've been around since the very beginning. What's your story, your beginning with Jamstack?
It's yeah, I mean, I guess you could say it's I don't know, it's hard to, point out exactly when it started, but I can just tell my personal story of, for me, what led me to kind of where the industry is today, was this interesting point in time, and I think it was around 2010. And so I began getting pretty frustrated with how I was building my personal websites for family members, and how, these websites were maintained and all of the challenges there. And so, a lot of the things that I'm interested in and do come from just, scratching an itch. And so around 2010, 2011, had a bunch of sites, and they're on WordPress and probably shared hosting or something like that. And I was getting frustrated about how these websites tend to just get hacked, and why are they costing me money every month to host, and why do I need to remember 5 sets of credentials, for cPanel, for WordPress, for whatever, to be able to go in and patch things and update, and like, why am I dealing with all of this? And it's not that I had like a some sort of deep perspective on it. It was just didn't make sense. And a couple of things happened. I started noticing these websites don't get updated too often. And I was like, why are we putting them on a server that's just like, it's going for this elaborate dance, but it's the exact same dance every time someone visits the site. WordPress comes up, it hits the database, it goes here, it formats this, it outputs that, and ta-da, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of just like efficiency, that didn't make too much sense either. And so that was happening, and one of the WordPress websites I was helping maintain was having kind of like constant hacking going on. And one day I bump into this blog post by Werner Vogels, the CTO of Amazon, back when AWS was like a very small piece of Amazon. And he's like, hey, we are introducing the ability to host websites from S3 buckets. And I'm like, yes. This makes so much sense. I haven't thought about static sites up until then, but that single blog post put me on this trajectory of, realizing that these websites can really be static. It didn't really get me thinking about static site generators, but that kind of showed up later because, well, how do you modify these websites? And so the first thing I did is I took my personal WordPress-based website, took a snapshot of it with, like, I was on Windows at the time. I downloaded this tool, just downloaded the entire website to my computer, and I threw it on an S3 file, mapped the domain, to the S3 bucket, mapped the domain to the S3 bucket, and like, I have a website, and it costs almost nothing. It is literally, I cannot imagine how it could get hacked, or it would require basically someone stealing my AWS credentials. And it's super fast. You visit it, it loads. So it was very, very exciting. And that got me, a month later, though, after the excitement kind of faded away, I was like, well, how do I edit this website? I mean, I want to create a new blog post. And so that didn't take me to the world of elaborate content management systems. It actually got me on this path of, I'm going to recreate my website as a single HTML file, and it's going to be very simplistic. And this is how, the way I'm going to edit it is I'm going to download this file from S3 to my computer. I'm going to edit it in Notepad or some IDE, and then upload it with CyberDuck. And I was kind of like very excited that I figured that out. And those were the days of like ProseMirror, which was a markdown editor that could edit markdown files in GitHub, and all of that started kind of evolving. And I was certain that something is going to happen with all of these kind of moving pieces. Jekyll was happening, suddenly it's 2013, 2014, and at some point in 2015 or 2016, I was like, I want to do something in this space, but I don't know what to do. But I'm going to start playing with this more concretely, because up until then, I was a user and a consumer. I want to see if I can build a tool. And the tool that I wanted to build was basically, I want an easy way to edit files in S3, because I was having HTML files in S3. And I was like, can I write a thin layer of JavaScript that would sit within my website and without a server involved, would let me interface with S3. I'm looking on my website or on some backend. S3 has a JavaScript API. So make an API call to S3, get the content, provide some sort of editing experience for it, and then write it back to S3 directly from that interface. And so you can think about it like a headless CMS for S3. And that got me on the path to telling people that that's what I'm doing and reading more about it. And one day I bump into a blog post by Matt Billman, the co-founder and CEO of Netlify, who's talking about all of these trends kind of converging. And the static sites, the benefits of the speed, the benefits of the security, the idea that front end is getting built. There's a CI/CD pipeline for front end. The idea that we can author and publish websites by relying on Git workflows of committing and merging and pushing and so forth. And I was, was fortunate to connect with the Netlify folks and get involved early on, and see the Jamstack term, be coined, and kind of become an avalanche that just captured the imagination of millions of developers who were annoyed by the same kind of things, the complexity of setting up and maintaining hosting for a website, the challenges with the security of software like WordPress, and the challenges of performance with websites that get rendered on the back end every time you visit them, versus just hosting a website from a CDN. And so here we are, 2021, soon to be 2022. The world is in love with Jamstack, and modern web tooling is redefining itself. I'll talk forever, so you have to stop me. So I'm going to pause right now.
That's fair. I was just, you made me think about a couple things. One was, I guess it's the same idea, your experience goes back all the way to 2010. There's this 5-6 year period before there's actually a Jamstack term, but people clearly having lots of pain in this area. I even remember, I guess I wasn't there. I remember the story at one of the agencies I was at, and it was that they had this client that had a fairly high traffic site. Not super high traffic. It was well visited. It wasn't enough that they basically, it was a Rails app that was running, and I think it was running on a single server. So the traffic was fine. It was low enough that it could handle a single server. But then this company was going to get featured on some primetime ABC show, and they're like, our traffic is going to really spike. It's going to take down this website. And so they did what you did with WordPress, but really with the homepage. They're like, we're going to take the homepage and render that, throw it up on S3, proxy to that file, and they're like, it didn't go down, but it was like a huge accomplishment that the website didn't crash when people were visiting it. And So I was thinking, I mean, it must be years and years of developers being like frustrated, but I guess just thinking, well, this is the way it is. I mean, why do you think it took so long from, I mean, even you recognize, or reading that blog post in 2010-ish, so Amazon is thinking about that, and we don't get a Netlify for 5-6 more years. So like what's happening in that period, and developers just dealing with the pain?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like we can come up with potential explanations, because I don't think it was a singular condition in the market that caused this idea to emerge. I think it's the convergence of several of them, and it's all hypothesis. Like you never really know, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the idea of Git workflows, Git really, like the adoption of Git and more specifically GitHub, and developers falling in love with this idea of source control for everything, because that's a jump that I did, right? Like we didn't used to think
Mm-hmm.
we didn't always used to think about our website as like code, or as like something that is meritful enough to be within source control. But suddenly you notice that there's so many benefits of the Git workflow that map into the publishing workflow for a website. I'm making changes. I want to preview them. I want to show them to someone on this other branch. I want to publish them. So I'm merging them. And so that lends itself so well. And so I think that another thing was just the emergence of static site generators, right? Because until you had static site generators probably made it easier for people to think about their front end website as like real code. Another thing that I've kind of heard people mention is just the readiness and evolution of the Node ecosystem and the JavaScript ecosystem. So maybe all of these things together, maybe the commoditization of the CDN, and then maybe just luck. I'm sure folks have tried to Jamstack right earlier on, but maybe it didn't catch up. Maybe there wasn't enough frustration with a large enough amount of developers, and so forth and so forth. And maybe the prevalence of hacking. Maybe hacking has been getting worse and worse and worse towards 2015 and 16, and that was an extra push. But it also just took people like Matt Billman and Chris Bach to put these pieces of the puzzle together and crystallize a product around it. For most of 2015, I was trying to do that, like individually as a person in my mind in my free time, and I was using terms like I had a good friend, Ron Sondler, who we used to talk a lot about this since 2010, and we used to look for ways to describe what this thing that we want to do would be, and like we started calling it like cPanel for domains, or like a cPanel for a new way to building. And I think that at the end of the day, Netlify was able to productize all of these ideas in a way that is just the people that just clicked for people, right? And that was basically the kickstart. It doesn't encompass the entire industry, but it was a very important piece of the story that helped birth the ecosystem, or at the very least accelerate the ecosystem.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great way to put that. Okay. So, all right. So we're to 2015, 2016, Jamstack's a term. The ideas, the frustrations have been there for a while. And even if we go back to your early days and your frustrations with WordPress, that's focused really on two things. You're focused on the frustrations of the developer experience. It's painful to work with WordPress, to keep updating it. And then you're also talking about the end user. Like, why are we spending all these compute cycles to do the same thing every time somebody lands on a page? So like those were two very clear issues in two sides of the process that the Jamstack solves really well. And what you mentioned early on was that you solve these problems with S3, and then it was like, oh wait, now we have to edit it. How do we edit it? And it was pretty apparent to me early on in my use of the Jamstack that felt like we had left the content editors behind. Like we've got this great tool for developers, that's optimized for the end user experience. Why is it, do you think, we left? Well, I guess one, do you agree with me? And if so, why did we leave content editors behind?
Yeah, totally. And it's not just content editors. If you take a step back, this ecosystem shift, or this thing that's happening, right? The Jamstack, or modern web tooling, or static sites, or all of this stuff, these are very developer-led movements. These are developers getting excited about their pains, or pains that they relate to, right? So like a developer pain can be, I need to code in PHP, or I need to maintain an AWS setup that is just a pain in the ass every time I need to change something. It's like to set up an SSL certificate in AWS is like horrible, right? It's extremely painful experience. I hate doing that. Or, I could make the website faster. That would be cool. I can relate to that. I'd get excited about that. I don't necessarily think about how marketing folks edit the site. And so I think that the Jamstack and the evolution of the Jamstack, and the fact that the Jamstack is like happening en masse, is driven by developers and the benefits that accrue mostly to them. And it is not atypical that during that process, especially early on, we sacrifice a lot of other things, or a lot of our other constituents. And I think that in the case of the Jamstack, we're still at this point where what's pushing the adoption of the Jamstack is developers and the benefits that accrue to them or to their areas of responsibility. But at the same time, they, colloquially, we are completely sacrificing a lot of the other stakeholders. And so the number one type of stakeholder to think about is the editors or the marketers, typically at companies, or people building these sites, not coding these sites, but the people clicking the H1 and trying out a headline, or the people creating a new blog post, or the people tasked with creating 15 new landing pages today for 15 different personas for a website, or the people tasked with launching a mini site based on the look and feel that the company already has for its site. Those are kind of like daily activities for people who work on websites that the shift to the Jamstack completely kind of ignores. We don't think about what's the editing experience like for these sites. We don't think about what is the workflow of working on these sites, and what's the interplay between like the non-technical people and the technical people. And the easiest way to look at this is to think about this is to think about products in the website building space that are geared at non-developers, and products that are kind of like end-to-end, so-called walled gardens. And the easy ones to think about are Shopify and Wix and Squarespace and recently even Webflow. Those are tools or platforms that enable someone to come in and kind of end-to-end build a website. That doesn't really exist with the Jamstack, and it's not to say that the Jamstack should reproduce that exact experience, even though I think there are benefits to that. And our company Stackbit that's the kind of stuff that we're working on. But I just think that looking at the activities that people go through during their work on these types of websites, and then looking at the Jamstack and asking, well, how do we do that? The answer is typically, you need a couple of developers to be heavily involved. And I think that that's kind of a glaring, an area with a bunch of needs, because the dissonance is that we as developers are excited about the Jamstack and we feel like we solved it. Like, oh, problem solved. Websites are fast, they're secure, total cost of ownership has gone down. And Jack from marketing, and, just needs to learn how to edit Markdown, and we'll be great. And we need to create him a user in GitHub. Or we need to set them up with Headless CMS XYZ, which is often a great way to edit content, but still leaves a lot to be desired in terms of working on websites, because inherently websites have the idea of content, and the Jamstack really promotes the idea of structured content and content as an entity which is separate from the website. Separate from the website itself. And so there's the idea of just editing content in a kind of a pure sense where we're focusing on content. But when you have a website which is generated from content, and content can be a blog post, or it could be an H1, and it can be the video in the hero section. But when people typically edit websites in a non kind of like forensic content editing mode, they expect a visual experience. And you see all the popular site builders, first and foremost, the experience that you get is visual editing. People want to be able to click, change, drag and drop, switch, see components, move around, pick layouts, preview changes instantly. And I think we're still at the phase with the Jamstack where those things are either impossible or there's a massive tax to be able to do them. And so I think that we're still at this point where it's a movement which is mainly pushed by developers and adopted by developers. And, I think that the ecosystem, through the ventures of many different companies and open source projects, is looking for this next level, to unlock this next level of productivity where we can actually have the Jamstack or Jamstack websites positively embraced by other constituents within companies or with clients for an agency or a freelancer.
Okay, I like that, and I want to come back to to talk about these the walled gardens, so to speak, the other site builder products out there. But first, let's jump to Stackbit. So, how do you think about what? What then? What do I want to say? How would you articulate the space that Stackbit is trying to fill in the Jamstack ecosystem?
I think that we look at the Jamstack and we're confident that it's the way that we're going to be building websites for the foreseeable future, whatever the next 5 to 10 years. And recognizing that the term Jamstack has a certain level of malleability to it, right? We're seeing it evolve, but generally speaking, we're going to move to build websites in terms of just like CI/CD, like literally run build commands for them, host them mostly statically on CDNs or new types of breeds of CDNs, and benefit from all the benefits that brings in terms of security and speed and complexity, or reduce complexity. The space that Stackbit is focusing on creating or capturing is basically making that accessible to the entire spectrum of people who are tasked with building sites and working on websites. We feel that today Jamstack websites are mostly available to highly technical people, or people who can spend a lot of time and effort on building customized, bespoke experiences that typically do not include or involve all of the constituents that are involved with working on a website. And so with Stackbit, we want to make the experience of creating Jamstack websites infinitely easier and quick and fast and accessible. So it doesn't take a day or a week to kind of get started by creating something from scratch or downloading a theme and configuring. And there's so much complexity that is ripe to being taken away from that process. And that's number one. And number two is just we are looking to reintroduce the website building and editing experience that everyone is familiar with from Wix and Squarespace and Webflow and Shopify. We're looking to reintroduce that into the world of the Jamstack, where it's very much lacking today. And mostly non-existent, unless in extremely proprietary ways and scenarios. And by doing that, we expect to bring Jamstack, to unlock Jamstack to kind of, the next level of adoption in the market. So we expect to tremendously increase the percentage of Jamstack websites as a proportion of all new websites that are created each day, and have everyone, benefit from what that brings.
Okay, so Stackbit is bringing to the Jamstack the editing experience that non-technical folks have expected from these other tools like Shopify, Wix, Squarespace, etc., and applying that to this movement that is developer-led, and which in large part had left behind a space for those content editors. And so in that way, trying to build a product that has to balance the content editing experience with the developer experience. And so what have you found to be the most difficult part of that process of solving that problem?
That's a good question. It's very much kind of multifaceted in terms of user experience. It's about balancing the needs and the value of different features to different personas. These Jamstack websites are inherently, as you had mentioned, it's a movement which is developer led. Typically, you will not have an end customer or a marketer in a company wake up and we need a Jamstack website. They'll talk in terms of, we need a faster website. I need to be able to publish things, really, really quickly. I need an easy way to manage 1,000 websites, and so forth and so forth. And so the developers are the ones who are going to wake up and say, you know what, we want to use the Jamstack. And it's exactly about recognizing that these websites are owned and managed by developers, and that the bigger the company and the more technical the company, the more opinionated will those developers be. And it's about how do we create an experience which is extremely accommodating to non-technical people who actually do the work in a company, right? And so literally it's a marketing, right? Developer built the blog, and now marketing needs to churn or crank content into that blog. How do we create a bridge for these two personas where the developer, who, again, took the decision to build a Jamstack website for technical reasons and for benefits that accrue to the developer, how do they create a path for marketing to come and participate in this new way of building websites? Because today, it's either, hey, marketing, you got to learn Markdown and start working on GitHub, or it's, we're going to set you up with a headless CMS, and you're going to be able to type up your blog posts there, but how do you actually execute the publishing workflow? How do you see your changes before they go public? How do you edit something that you can't really find how to edit? And so that the disconnect that headless CMSs bring between content and how it's visualized makes sense in a content-centric world. But if you're in a website-centric world, it's very important to have a visual editing experience. It's something that is really an order of magnitudes more intuitive to people. And so from a developer perspective, how do we create, what product can I put on top of my Jamstack website that's going to create an interface that is convenient and familiar for my marketers to use on a daily basis, but that works with how I think about the developer-led kind of way for this website to work, right? I want my marketer to hit publish, but I actually want that to create a pull request for me in GitHub. That's the bridge, right? I want my marketer to hit, new, like a new version of the website because they're going to add a blog post or something. I want that to create a branch, right? I want to be able to define these things. I want to be able to create a place for my marketer to come in and do their work, to empower them to be as self-serve as they can. But I kind of want to know that they're not going to be able to break my entire website. I want to decide if we empower them to go and publish by themselves. And I want everything to map into this Git-based workflow, which we've adopted for everything, including for the website. And so that's a lot of where Stackbit exists. And I think that once you facilitate that, we see that whenever there's whenever that happens, the developer is we started with the blog, but we want to use this for the homepage now because the marketers want to edit the homepage all the time, and they have to go through us, right? And so this is just like, what does the adoption curve look like within an organization? And once you introduce this bridge and this tool, it just simplifies and it creates a very healthy contract between engineering and let's just use marketing, as a general term for people editing the websites because it's most common in larger companies and even smaller companies. It just creates a very healthy contract that is codified and is codified through the Git workflow and productized by Stackbit, basically.
I like that. Okay. So you said, I've heard a few folks around Stackbit talking about protecting content editors against breaking the website. And I recall back in the days of building these super customized websites at agencies that part of the reason we made them super strict was because we want to ensure that the design we're giving you is top notch and you can't break this thing. And then on the other hand, you've got a lot of these other site builder tools that are really flexible, which is really powerful, but non-technical people are constantly making decisions that aren't necessarily in the same or in the interest aren't aligned with what the designer might execute there. And so how would you say that Stackbit is helping protect content editors from breaking a website?
It's there's so many things happening here. The first is that we're really building websites in a new way. And one of the core elements of this new way of building websites is that we are asking developers to take visual designs and break them into reusable components, and that is expressed most typically through content schemas. Because in order to facilitate a blog post that has this element and this property and this ability to look differently, and you basically have developers thinking about, how do I, about generalizing things and expressing them through content schema. The content schema is basically the contract between the content and the visual representation of the website. And the static site generator or the tool, the build tool that sits in the middle, needs to be able to consume the content according to the content schema, and based on the contents of the content, needs to be able to generate a website that looks kind of like what the content editor wanted to do. So like if your blog post has a checkbox that says don't show the date this was published, right? And obviously the component that consumes that piece of information needs to be able to not render the date. That's not really an exciting example, but just to say that we're asking developers to do things that they haven't done a lot in the past. And I can say this with confidence because we've seen people thousands of times within Stackbit building and customizing websites, and people don't yet have enough best practices and knowledge on how to craft these content models so that you can express the visual results that you want. One of the problems is that there are multiple ways to reach the same end goal. And most people you don't have a lot of experience with like the pros and cons. And one of the things that can happen is that if you don't design your content schema in a good way, you can enable content editors to break the build process. I'll give you a super simple example, okay? Let's say we have a blog post. Let's say the homepage has a featured section that can feature a couple of different articles, whatever. And that's basically, you express that in the content schema as a list. And you use a headless CMS, the editor comes in and they delete the current items in the list. They want to put in new items, but they'll do it later. In the meantime, they publish. Now you have a list that's empty. Now you push to GitHub, your build process wakes up. Let's say you use Gatsby or Next.js, whatever, and you wrote some template logic, and suddenly the fact that you have, 0 items in your array breaks the build. Why? Because you always reference the first item. You didn't create a loop. Okay, so here's an example. Like, we're asking people to do things in a new way. They don't have enough examples and best practices. And so, no bad intentions on the part of the editor, but they literally broke the site. The site isn't building. Like, if they had other changes that were supposed to get published at the same time, those changes aren't getting published. The website isn't really getting updated. So, a lot of what we do is we author, AUTHOR. We author what we feel are like very solid content schemas, and part of through the themes and templates that we offer and the components that we offer, that significantly reduce the chance for editors to break the website by doing things that may seem normal to them, but that developers haven't necessarily anticipated. And also within the editing experience itself, because we're always running the build tool in dev mode, like, we immediately know if something breaks, and so we can inform the content editor that the action that they just took has broken the build for whatever reason, enable them to roll back, and basically, if we take a step back, I think we as a company are recognizing this emerging field of not only can the content schema affect the ability of an editor to break a website, but a good content schema can make it easy for an editor to get the results that they want, and a bad content schema can make it extremely hard or impossible. And through by recognizing that, we're working on educating developers on how to craft content schemas that produce great and intuitive editing experiences, right? So we're recognizing the editability of a website through the quality of its content schema. And to improve that, we're providing good content schemas, and we're trying to improve our visual editing experience so that it can overcome bad content schemas.
I love that. That's a great way to articulate that idea. And I feel like the more you dig into this, the more I'm like, oh, I've got all these horror stories, that you're bringing up. Like, it's not the headless, the CMS issue that you described. Had to deal with that 100 times because it's so the logic is decoupled, and it can just be a mess. One thing I thought of that I hadn't really considered much before is the move to the Jamstack felt really really valuable, really powerful from a developer perspective. From an architectural perspective, you're like, I've got CMS here, and it's great. CMS doesn't care at all what's going on the front end, and so you can have 100 front ends. It doesn't matter. It's just design the schema in a way that works, makes sense for those front ends. What I hadn't really considered is that there are benefits you lose from that decoupling that you get with coupling, and one of them being that you're not going to get feedback from the build process in the headless CMS, and that's something that Stackbit gives you, because it's almost like Stackbit it's an editor, but it's also stitching these tools together and giving you visibility into the various tools, which just not something I thought about before.
Right. And we love headless CMSs, and we think that they're great. We tend to think about them more as content platforms and as optimal ways to store content and provide alternative means for editing, that content and creating kind of elaborate enterprise workflows around that content. But when most of that content is used to create a website, and when most of the editing in that website is is not like inputting 1,000 terms into a list, which, of course, you would want a user interface that is more like a database or Excel to do that. But if you're editing a website, if you're changing headlines, switching images, and so forth, what we keep seeing is that, and as evidenced by the website platforms and tools and editors on the market, the preference is to do visual. And so, there is for more advanced users of Stackbit, we work hand in hand with companies like Contentful and Sanity for companies that want to store their content in headless CMSs because they have elaborate content silo challenges or content workflows or whatnot, translate complex translation and so forth, to store the content in these platforms. but do the majority of the editing and the management of the workflow of what's happening with the website through a tool that people can actually use to edit the website. And these things can work very, very nicely hand in hand, because the headless CMSs aren't trying to replace what we historically called a CMS. They're really, really focusing on the content, right? And so that's also part of the challenge with the term, because when you just say headless CMS, it doesn't strongly represent how headless this thing actually is, right? Because the historic monolithic CMSs, they used to store the content, give you a way to edit it, show you a preview of a website, let you manage the publishing workflow, work on all of your assets, preview everything, and so forth and so forth. Headless CMSs are focusing on structured content, its storage, its management, a clean interface to editing it, and so forth and so forth.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. I have one quick question. Well, before we wrap up, going way back. Here it is. Okay. So when you were talking about Shopify, Wix, Squarespace, Webflow, etc., and before we started talking about Stackbit, you said that an end-to-end tool like that enables folks to build their websites, or non-technical folks to build their websites, isn't necessarily something that should exist with the Jamstack. Just curious why you said that. Wanted some clarification on that.
Well, so if you look at the market, let's look at Wix and Squarespace. Okay, those are basically consumerized website building tools geared at individuals, very, very small companies, and so forth. Great tools, right? They enable non-technical people to do production work, and the merits of these tools is that they're accessible and that they're useful and usable, and again, and that my mom can get on Wix and kind of put a website together. Actually, she did a pretty good one recently, but that's what these tools are measured by. And by the way, they're not even measured by that, because by now, specifically these two companies, Wix and Squarespace, are mainly competing on customer acquisition. I don't think most users who end up using Wix or Squarespace actually evaluate both of them and compare them according to the merits of the editing experience. It's just they have been acquired when they saw an ad somewhere. And so why does the world not necessarily need like a Jamstack site builder geared to that audience? Because that audience doesn't typically make their decision based on the values that the Jamstack brings to the table. Mm-hmm. It's a very different audience that that would pick a website builder because it is built on the Jamstack. And that audience exists, and it's not tiny even, and it may even be interesting. And like we definitely at Stackbit get a lot of that audience. But I think that most of the benefits accrue to larger companies that have more complicated needs, and for whom the benefits of the Jamstack are much more material. And remember, they're more material to the technical people. And when do you have very technical people building websites? Typically at much larger companies, at large agencies, freelancers who are on the bleeding edge, and so forth and so forth. So if you're building products for the Jamstack, you probably want to ask yourself, what do these people need? Like, what are they missing? Because to go out there and just try to compete with, Squarespace, but be Jamstack backed, it's like your messaging is going to go above the head of the typical person who uses that product. It's like, what's Jamstack? Who cares? Can I drag and drop? Can I click? Right. Like, can I build this? Am I able to build a website without calling my daughter? That's how I'm gauging this. Yeah. Do I get that with Jamstack? Like, whatever, I don't care. Like, I'm probably going to use Wix or Squarespace. The website builder market is so big. You have niche players that are now in themselves very big, right? Like, look at Webflow. Webflow is, my interpretation is mainly geared at like empowering designers to build websites without having to rely on a developer, right? Like, talk about a niche market. but I mean, look, it's pretty big. And then you have all these designers who are coming in and they're excited. Suddenly they can build websites without developers. And so I think for the Jamstack, if you think about a Jamstack site builder, it's probably important for it to echo strong value propositions that are technical. Otherwise, it's competing on an unfair ground.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. And so just to throw another agency story in there. Yeah. The last agency I worked at, we went all in on Jamstack. Their website was built with Webflow because the designer managed the website and he didn't want to have to bug developers to get something done. Which I guess
there you
interesting. Yeah.
There you go.
All righty. Well, thanks.
Cool.
I peppered you with questions and the answers were amazing. So
it's fun. Thanks for the high praise and thanks for the great conversation.